I'm Michelle Belanger,
And I'm Jackie Williams.
and we're going to talk about the color schemes of the tarot, the Watcher Angel Tarot, particularly for each of the four suits. Traditionally in tarot, you have four suits: cups, swords, pentacles, and wands. They are generally thought to correspond with each of the four elements. Water for cups, Earth for Pentacles, and I heave a heavy sigh because there is some debate among tarot aficionados as to whether or not swords are air or fire, and subsequently whether or not wands are air or fire. I hail from the school of thought wherein wands represent the vital energy and the inner fire that sleeps within the wood of the wand, and therefore wands are definitively fire, and swords, although forged in fire, are nevertheless more indicative of the cutting air of the mind, uh, so sharp, sometimes cold and dispassionate intellect for the swords, as well as conflict and all those things that you do with swords, like, kill people and threaten them and scare them and wage war and all that fun stuff. But with creating the deck, one of the things that we had to keep in mind was the color scheme for each of the suits. We wanted our suits to be internally consistent on a couple of levels, not only color, but also style, time period, which is kind of a mythically projected time period that serves as a backdrop for the real important part, which is the story. One of a big concept for the Watcher Angel Tarot is that the tarot is about story, and it is used to tell stories and myths. And each of the suits has its own progressive story from start to finish, from ace to 10, with the court cards then representing key characters, key players who would be in those stories. So I'm going to turn it over to Miss Jackie, who is going to give you some idea about her contribution also to the idea of color. And I got to tell you, working with this gal for almost 10 years, color speaks to her in a way that I can't even begin to cover. And to be frank, her eyes can see shades and nuances in color that half the time I'm like, well, if you say so. But from the response of those cards, other people can see it too. So
So, what I was thinking about when I was first conceiving of the idea of the suits is um, we had to use certain elements in the tarot deck that would not freak people out too much. So, for instance, I did not want to use uh, 8 cups in a card to represent the 8 of cups. I thought that's just silly,
oh,
if I
just as
can,
like solo pips.
yeah, if I can carry the idea of the card in just a picture or a story of, within the picture, why do I need to represent the name of the suit in the card itself? Why does there have to be 3 swords shown? Why does there have to be 5 wands shown?
We don't depart so radically as to excise the wands or the cups from the
Right.
deck, of course, entirely. Although our wands are different,
And the wands
and
are
we'll get to
different.
that in a minute.
But what I wanted to do was more embed those symbols into the card so that they were present so as to be available to people who relied on that imagery, but to not take up the image of the card. So that was one of the things I'd chosen to do with the suits, was to embed the actual image of the cups or the swords,
They're integrated.
and integrate them into the story, integrate them into the card, so that they became a functional part of the picture. Um,
Well, I mean, some of the worst like concept tarot decks that I've seen, and there's some stinkers out there, let's be
mm,
honest, are ones where it's like you've got somebody has slapped together a picture that they clearly had somewhere else that didn't have anything to do with tarot and just sort of like dumped a bunch of cups around in it.
right.
And I mean, you've all seen decks like that, and we didn't want to look like it was forced or artificial.
But in the embedding process of incorporating those symbols into the card itself, I wanted to make sure that the suit didn't get lost too. So I chose colors to accompany each suit, as well as embedding the images. So um, you didn't have to pay as close attention to what the symbol is on the card when you turn a card over. If you see reds, you know you're in wands. If you see greens, you know you're in pentacles. Blues for the cups. And for the swords, I really liked the idea of Payne's gray and white. I was having a love affair with the color Payne's gray, but I chose a gray for the swords. Not because swords are gray, but just because it was bleak, and I would punctuate the cards with color, with red, to sort of pop the harshness of it.
Mm.
But each suit was carried through with its own color and with the symbols embedded in the card, that people would not get lost if they were, especially if they were doing a meditative reading. All they would have to see is sort of the basic image and the color, and not necessarily have to sit there and count the number of cups or the number of swords. But to give each suit a cohesiveness, and what I also did with some of the cards, especially like for instance in the wand suit, I gradiated the color from start to finish, where you start off with the wands, which happen to be, in this case, balls of power, because wands represent power, and you know
This was one of those meditation
it was one
things
of those meditation
where
things.
I started on the Rider-Waite, and the one suit that spoke to me with a lisp and haltingly and poorly always was wands. I had a really hard time associating wands with what they were actually supposed to mean. Uh, Now, in the symbol of the Rider-Waite, you have a club-like wand, which, you know, it's a big old club of wood, and it has green leaves that are growing from it. The green leaves are supposed to represent the life force inherent in this wood. Even though it has been cut from the tree and severed, the life is still blossoming forth. There's still that vital fire within the wand. And just some of the images and the pictorial representations in the Rider-Waite. I mean, the one card that always sticks in my head is there's a bunch of wands flying across the card. Woo.
Yeah.
It totally lost me. And as I started to think about the debate, particularly with, you know, our swords fire or our wands fire, uh, I had to really settle on, well, swords, you know, swords in my mind are set against this bleak, wind-swept background, and the wands are the vital living fire. So why not have that vital fire released from the wands itself? Our wands suit tell a story of magic. It's one of the things each of the suits, as I said, elaborates on the mythology of the Watchers. In the Book of Enoch, the Watcher angels look down upon the daughters of man, and they find them fair, and they choose among them wives. And they not only settle down on the earth, but they take wives, they build families, they build empires, they teach their sons and their daughters forbidden magical arts, and they establish this sweeping society that is a melding of the sensibilities of heaven and earth. And that connection, that commingling of spirit and flesh, of heaven and earth, of the divine and the fleshly, is a theme that you will find woven throughout the story of the Watcher Tarot. With each of the suits, and the order in which they progress is a little different from what you'll encounter in a lot of traditional decks. We start with Pentacles, Earth, because it is the point of establishment. The Pentacles have a primitive feel to the colors and the figures, and it represents the time period in which the Watchers come down, first start taking wives or husbands, and start their families, start their homesteads, establishment of their cities and their empires. It is earth tones, greens, browns, stone, and craftsmanship is a core of this suit. So if you'll grab me our ace.
There we go.
So these are colors that you see And one of the other things that you'll see if you look at the deck in total, and by the way, the website is spiralfirestudio.com, you'll see it here, is there is a progression of the color from ace to 10. In some cases, it gets brighter and brighter. In other cases, it gets darker and darker, depending on the core story of that suit.
For instance, in the wand suit, you start with a bright yet still dark sort of card, and when you go to the Two of Wands, it is the initial spark. So the entire card, but for that center, is dark. As you progress in that suit, the cards get brighter and brighter as power develops, until finally you hit the Ten of Wands, and it's just an explosion of yellows and red hues, but the orangey tones that that show that the power of the suit has developed, and that the Ten of Wands is the overwhelming power that
Yeah,
is overburdening someone.
Super saturation of color.
Super saturation. But the suits do progress in terms of shade to graduate the story and to build upon it, and go both in shade and in the story.
The pentacles are the age of establishment, and then the cups are the golden age of art, beauty, and poetry that emerges, which, of course, cups are water. They are the element of emotion, of dreams, creativity, psychic ability, and, of course, our cups are done in shades of blue and white. And there is a lush, almost neoclassical look to them, a Renaissance flair in the costuming, things that also speak about each of these internal stories, where the pentacles are very primitive, almost the sort of style of building and things that you'd see in ancient cultures, in the Fertile Crescent, stuff like that. The cups are indicative of the time periods that we in the Western world associate with high points of art and beauty.
And there's the
And
swords.
then, oh no, we go to the wands next. That next part of the story. One of the key things about the Watcher myth is that, and this is where they erred as far as the celestial throne was concerned, is much like the Greek titan Prometheus, they loved humanity too much. And they taught humans, their wives and their children, the magical arts, forbidden knowledge, divination, the signs of the sun, the courses of the moon, sorcery, the loosing of enchantments, even the smitings of magic, up into and including, for the angel Casdea, the smitings of the infant in the womb, end quote. So essentially, he taught people how to abort fetuses, which is a fairly chilling ability, and probably no wonder that folks who were reading this way back in the early church were kind of rather taken aback. So here are wands. Wands represent the age in which people are struggling and striving among themselves to master and to show off their mastery of the Watcher's magic. And so you have this hermetic flair, almost a hermetic college. And the story unfolds in the wands, fire, vital force of these almost like sorcerers' apprentices who are learning from angelic masters and developing their own ability to bring forth that soul fire, that manifestation of their will and their vitality, which they use to power magic. And in this one, again, that fire, and this is the key thing about our wands, while you will see this particular wand represented over and over again, at least somewhere in every single card of the wand suit, the pips themselves of the wands are the balls of vital force, the shining orbs of power that are evoked from the wands. So that fire is released, so there's no doubt about what of the elements that suit is associated with.
Because in magic, in magic, you might have a tool, which is the wand, but the power comes from within you. You yourself are the tool, and you embody all of that power, and so it comes from you, and you don't need 9 tools.